days, but we'd like to put it all on program. So, and it's a good thing we're not doing the entire Die Meistersinger opera today, but we'd be here till about 11 o'clock tonight. So, I first chose Die Meistersinger as a selection for youth orchestra back in the fall. Actually, it was an idea of Demeter's. He thought it'd be a good piece to challenge the orchestra, and I agreed with him. And actually, in fact, a youth orchestra in Worcester, a school I used to teach at, had done it several times, and they seemed to be pretty successful with it. So I thought it was actually something that would be perfect for us. It's got everything. It's got lots of big sounds, lots of big blowing for the brass guys, so they're not going to get bored back there. Lots of wind intricacies, and strings have plenty of things to challenge them from now until probably you're 20 years old. The first rehearsal actually was quite abysmal. And oh my God, this is going to be really hard. I mean, it's very intricate music. It's like a Wagner piece. You have to peel away layer after layer of things that are so neatly and beautifully interwoven. In a sense, you're going to hear the entire opera in this 14-minute overture. It's just we're going to play all the themes at the same time together in different places. There's always the elephant in the room when we talk about Richard Wagner. Richard Wagner was really the height of German romantic opera, starting back in the early 1800s. It evolved, and Wagner's work was so immense that he finally got his patron, Mad King Ludwig II of Bavaria, to build an entire opera house for him that was specifically designed by Wagner, because there were no opera houses in the entire European continent that could actually stage some of the things he was writing. He wrote things in a way that nobody had ever thought of writing. He wrote all the libretto, the poetry that was sung. He designed all the sets. He designed the acting and directed acting. And then the orchestras themselves in the pit were the size of major symphony orchestras, unheard of for those days. And because of his patron, Ludwig, he had immense financial, actually he bankrupted Bavaria, by the way. But that was okay for Wagner. But I mean, he could put in the 8 French horns, 2 bass tubas, I mean, things I can't even afford to stage in a symphony orchestra right now. The elephant is that Wagner was the darling of the Nazi regime during its brief but horrible rule of tyranny over Europe. Going back to 1933, when Hitler became the chancellor and eventually dictator, the whole Nazi party, high echelon, would make a yearly pilgrimage to Bayreuth to see the entire Ring cycle. It's staged every summer there still. All 4 operas, one after another, going in a cycle for weeks and weeks. And there's all those film footages of Hitler arriving to enjoy Wagner, which he, you know, as you've heard him quoted if you watch a movie Valkyrie, you can't understand National Socialism if you don't appreciate your Wagner. Wagner wrote Germanic themes, and all of his stories come out of Germanic folklore and mythology. So in one sense, he was just enunciating this German folklore that had existed. But on the other hand, he was a virulent anti-Semite. Coming out of his days as an early composer, he had this twisted view that the Jewish successful composers such as Mendelssohn and Meyerbeer and the others whose operas were being staged at the time, you know, were this cartel that were keeping him from being successful. And his rantings and his ravings, you know, are documented. So that together with his German folklore, he obviously became the icon of the Nazi Third Reich. Richard Strauss, great German composer of the late 1800s and 20th century, was actually the composer laureate in his waning years of the Third Reich. There's no history to prove that Strauss had any kind of anti-Semitism or Nazi leanings. He was actually so old, he probably was unaware of the Nazis at the time, but yet he was made like the icon of the composer laureate, just like we have a poet laureate. We should still listen to Richard Strauss's music. It's great music. And in fact, Wagner's music is the work of a genius. He is a sick, albeit genius, a megalomaniac. You know, he was a short man, so he also suffered from that short man complex. Affected airs such as always wearing a beret and an ascot, and he was quoted even, you know, by his friends as saying, you know, doesn't it give you a thrill to be in the same room with me? I mean, you know, the man had no lack of ego. His music is, you know, we delve into this short selection of his, is genius. And without Wagner, there would have been no music for Lord of the Rings, because everything that Howard Shore wrote in Lord of the Rings, and in fact many other film score writers, is influenced by the music of Wagner. The idea of assigning musical themes to various characters or icons or even objects in an opera. So, in the State of Israel, from its founding in 1948, there was an unspoken rule that Wagner would not be performed. That rule was broken in the early 1990s by none other than Zubin Mehta, who was at the same time the conductor of the New York Philharmonic and Israel Philharmonic, and he programmed one of the most beautiful orchestral interludes ever written one night at the end of the concert. He put the music out on the stands for the musicians. It's the Liebestod prelude from the opera Tristan and Isolde. He turned to the audience and said, "We're about to play Wagner. I understand the pain it can inflict on people who suffered in the Holocaust. Anyone who would like to leave right now, please exit quietly." Most of the audience stayed, and Wagner is now a staple on concerts at Israel Philharmonic and throughout that great country. What we can draw from this is a learning. I have no lesson to tell you about how a culture that could create Mozart, Beethoven, Goethe, all the other great artists that we in Western civilization have come to need. It could also produce a Holocaust and horror unseen unto that moment. So it's a learning thing for us to not become like that, but also to be forewarned and vigilant lest things like that happen. The Germans don't have the market on genocide, as we now know. I mean, there's been plenty of them since that time. And in fact, you know, most of the time, the attitude of the rest of the world, like it was in 1940, is to sit back and say, we don't want to be involved. Maybe we ought to. Maybe when the Jewish refugees came to Washington, D.C. and knocked on the door of the White House, FDR should have actually listened to them, let them in. He refused them audience. Everyone refused until General George Patton's troops arrived at the gates and found what had been going on. Serbia, another example in the 90s. It goes on, all the genocides in Africa. We are a brutal race of beings on this earth that need to learn. And to me, as a musician, music is the ministry that can most hopefully bring people together and make them more sentient. Thank you.